thank you very much for a fascinating talk. I'll start by saying, well, if you were the Home Secretary, what does drug policy look like to you?
Yeah, so we decriminalise instantly, because criminalisation of drug users has actually created so much of the problem we have. And we've got the Portuguese example. 17 years ago, the Portuguese decriminalised personal possession of every drug. Actually, the Scots have done that just a few months ago. But the Portuguese experiment is really interesting, because in the 15 years of data we have from that, they have reduced opiate deaths to 1/3 of what they were 15 years ago. In Britain, our policy of criminalising drug users we've increased opiate deaths by 2/3. So we know that decriminalisation works because it takes people out of the back market, gets them to healthcare. I'd also have a regulated market for all drugs which are less harmful to the user than alcohol. I think it's iniquitous, it is immoral, that if you want to take a drug to relax yourself or to have fun, the only one you can take is alcohol, which is one of the more harmful drugs. So I think you make mushrooms and you make LSD, again, you make cannabis available recreationally. In licensed shops, which we have, they're called pharmacists. So those would be the two big policies that I would bring in.
So a question about the MDMA and the PTSD, and I suppose in general as well. Does the one treatment or the couple of treatments you do at once, is that something that it improves for a while, or would you have to continue to take that?
Yeah, great question. So, and the answer is it varies with person. Same with the psilocybin. So we've got people who are well 8 years after one dose because you've got rid of the depression, they're thinking differently. But for most people, the pressures to be depressed come back. If you've been traumatized since you were a child, your brain is set in a way which sees everything as threatening and depressive. So you may need multiple treatments over time. Or you may need other treatments to keep you well. So one of the things I'm thinking is, take psilocybin for depression, get people well. How can we keep them well? Well, we could give them a dose every 6 months or something. Or we could put them on an SSRI to see because they're very good at preventing relapse. Or we could put on maybe a microdosing of psilocybin to keep them well. With MDMA, we don't exactly know, it may be if you could stabilize them on an SSRI, that might protect them against relapse. It might be you won't need to do subsequent sessions. But MDMA may be more enduring than psilocybin because you can do psychotherapy within the trip, within the experience. And the mechanism is very different from a psychedelic experience, which is why you can do therapy within it, because they're kind of conscious and in the same room. And we know that once you have extinguished the emotional component of the trauma, you don't have PTSD. You still remember the trauma, but you don't have the emotion overwhelming you. So you may well get better long-term outcomes with PTSD because you're actually getting rid of the one element that is causing the problem.
Absolutely brilliant, informative lecture, and I think really highlights the deficits with policy making in this country. And quite a specific question for me. Psychedelics for cluster headaches is, I believe, an area that's under further investigation. Do you foresee much progress with that specifically in the next couple of years? I have a relative who suffers and has found them quite helpful. So,
well, I do hope so. The problem with cluster headaches is that they're horrible, horrible things, but there's not a lot of people having them, and therefore there's not a lot of commercial interest. And that's one of the reasons we need to reschedule. Because it's absurd, isn't it? It's absurd that your relatives know there's a treatment, but they can't access it until a drug company decides to do a study or two studies in a disorder which they won't do. So if we rescheduled psilocybin, then doctors could prescribe off license a Schedule 2 drug, and then you could, and that's why it's a really imperative. We've got to get it out of Schedule 1 so it's much more accessible for individual doctors to use. So the answer is, if we don't do that, it'll be 4 or 5 years. And if we do that, it could be tomorrow.
Yeah, I just wanted to say as well, that was a really amazing talk. I feel like you're a modern day hero, so thank you for everything you've done. But what would you say is about the kind of political environment today that means with all of this information now coming out that they kind of still refuse to admit that these are really beneficial treatments and could help millions of people?
Well, the reality is that we have one of the problems, is going back to your first question, one of the problems we have in Britain is that we have vested control over drug policy in the Home Office. Most countries realise that drugs are about health and putting health. Now, you probably reflect back over the last few Home Secretaries. You probably, you couldn't get individuals who were any less hostile to drugs than the ones we have had. And that's because the Home Office is about police are about punishment. So we've got to, the first thing we've got to do is get drugs out of the Home Office and get them into health so that we can have a sensible discussion. But at present we can't. With Patel and before her, Theresa, they take a moral stance on drugs. You cannot discuss with them. It's not they won't. They can't. They don't have the intellectual ability to see. They haven't got the mental flexibility to see that it is a health problem. Because to them it isn't. To them it's a legal problem because it's illegal. I mean, there's a wonder. I don't know if you remember. I didn't talk about my. One of the reasons I got sacked was I wrote a paper comparing ecstasy harms to horse riding harms. And the Home Secretary at the time was Jackie Smith, and she rang me up. She screamed at me down the phone, saying, you can't compare deaths from ecstasy from deaths from horse riding. And I said, well, why not? Because one's illegal. Why is it illegal? You can't compare the harms of drugs. It's made illegal, so you're not going to think about it, because if you think about it, you realise it shouldn't be illegal. So, and that is the fundamental problem. And it's kind of paradoxical. And you think this is kind of madness that everyone knows. You can be, it's not just, but we have to toe this line, which is partly driven by the Home Office and partly driven by the Daily Mail, and that's a very toxic combination.